She came at first light, always. He did not know when it had started, the watching. He could not have named the first morning. It had begun the way a habit begins, without decision, without thought, the way a man's eye finds a fixed point in a moving world and returns to it, because the returning is easier than the searching. The window of his study faced east. It looked out over a long slope of rough grass that ran down from the house to the sea wall, and beyond the sea wall was the shore, a wide curve of grey sand and black rock, and beyond the shore was the sea, which was always moving and never the same, and which he had stopped seeing the way a man stops seeing the weather when the weather is all there is. But she was not the weather. She was a woman on the shore at first light, and she came every morning, and she did the same thing every morning, and the sameness of it was what held him. She walked the tide line. She walked it slowly, steadily, bent at the waist, with a basket on her arm and a knife in her hand. She was harvesting something from the rocks. He could not see what, from the distance of the window, seaweed perhaps, or shellfish. She moved along the waterline with the deliberate patience of a person doing a thing they have done 1,000 times and mean to do well on the 1,001st. She wore a dark cloak and heavy boots, and her hair was tied back under a cloth, and from the study window she was a shape, a silhouette, a small dark figure against the grey morning sea. He could not see her face. He had never seen her face. He knew only the shape of her, the particular way she moved, the angle of her back when she bent to the rocks, and the straightness of it when she rose. He watched her every morning. He had watched her for 5 months. He did not know her name. He did not know where she lived. He did not know what she gathered from the rocks, or where she carried it, or what became of it. He knew only that she came at first light, and stayed an hour, and walked back along the shore, toward the headland, and disappeared around the point, and that the shore, after she left, was emptier than it had been before, in a way that had nothing to do with the tide. The Duke of Ravensmere was not a man who watched things. He was a man who worked. He had been a man who worked since he was 27, when his father died without warning and left him a title and an estate and a house on a cliff above the sea that had been falling for a generation and needed, more than anything, a man who would not stop. He had not stopped. In 5 years he had rebuilt the farms and mended the walls and cleared the debts and drained the fields and done everything a duke is supposed to do with an estate he inherits in poor condition, which is to say, he had worked without rest and without company, and without anyone in the world to tell him when to put the pen down and look out the window. His mother had done that once. His mother had been the person who came into his study at 7 in the evening and said, "Enough. The estate will be here in the morning. You will not, if you do not eat." She had made him eat. She had made him walk the grounds. She had made him, on the rare evenings when the work relented, sit with her in the drawing room and listen while she read aloud, because she said, "A man who hears no voice but his own will go mad and not know it." She had died 2 years ago, a winter illness that should not have killed her, and did. He had nursed her himself for the last week, and she had held his hand on the last morning and said, "You must stop, Edmund. Not the work, the hiding. You hide in the work the way your father hid in the bottle. It is a more respectable hiding place, but it is hiding all the same." She had been right. She had been right about most things, and wrong about none, and the rightness of her opinions was no help to him now, because the person who had spoken them was in the churchyard at the edge of the park, and the study was quiet, and the evenings were very long. He had not stopped. He had done what grieving men do when they cannot grieve, which is work harder. He had buried himself in the estate books and the tenants' ledgers and the long, cold columns of figures that told him everything about his land and nothing about himself. He had become, in 2 years, exactly the thing his mother had warned him against. A man who hears no voice but his own. And then, one morning in May, he had looked out the window and seen a woman on the shore. He had not thought about it. He had been standing at the glass with a cold cup of tea, waiting for the light to come up enough to read by, and she had been there, a dark shape at the tideline, bending and rising, with the patience of a thing that belongs to the landscape. He had watched her for perhaps a minute. Then the light had come, and he had gone to his desk, and the day had begun. The next morning he had looked again. She was there. The morning after, he had looked earlier. She was already there. By the end of the week, he was at the window at first light, before the tea, before the desk, before the work. He stood in the dark study and watched the dark shore and waited for the small dark figure to appear around the headland, and when she appeared, something in his chest eased by a fraction, the way a fist eases when the thing it has been gripping is still there. He did not understand it. He was not a man who understood things about himself easily. He understood drainage and debt, and the tensile strength of a sea-wall in a westerly gale. He did not understand why the sight of a stranger on a beach at 5 in the morning made the day bearable. He understood only that it did, and that the mornings she did not come, which were few, the day was worse. 5 months of this. 5 months of watching. 5 months of a woman on a shore who did not know she was watched, and did not look up, and did not perform, and did not exist, for all she knew, for anyone but herself and the tide and whatever she was gathering from the rocks. She never once looked his way. That was the thing. That was the whole of it. In 5 months of mornings, she had never once glanced up the slope toward the house. She had never once raised her head from her work and looked toward the great pale house on the cliff, with its 100 windows and its shut doors and its single-lit study, where a man stood in the dark and watched her. She did not know he was there. She did not care whether he was there. She was absorbed in her work, the way he was absorbed in his, and the absorption was total and honest and entirely without audience, and he found, watching it, that he could not look away. It was the absence of performance that held him. He had spent 5 years being performed for. Every tenant, every tradesman, every visitor to Rathmore arranged their face and their voice and their whole self for the Duke. They showed him what they wished him to see. They told him what they wished him to hear. They performed, and he received the performance. And behind the performance, the real person stood hidden, like a woman behind a curtain, and he could never quite reach her. This woman on the shore did not perform. She could not. She did not know she had an audience. She was simply herself, doing her work, at the hour of the day when no one watches and no one cares, and the simplicity of it was the most beautiful thing he had seen in 2 years. He did not go down to the shore. He thought about it every morning, and did not do it. He did not do it because going down would change it. Going down would turn the watched into the met, and the met would perform, and the performance would kill the thing that he came to the window to see. So he watched. He watched from the dark study above the sea, and the watching became a kind of sustenance, the way his mother's voice had been a sustenance, a thing that came from outside himself and reminded him that the world contained something other than columns of figures and the slow, grinding work of keeping a house alive. His grandmother saw it. Of course she saw it, The Dowager Duchess of Rathmore, Lady Elspeth, was 81 and missed nothing. She lived in the Dower House at the edge of the park, a quarter-mile from the great house, and she came to dinner twice a week, and twice a week she looked at her grandson across the table and read his face the way a sailor reads the sky. "You are sleeping badly," she said one evening in October. "I am sleeping as I always sleep. You are sleeping badly and rising early. You have the look of a man who gets up before the light. I know the look. Your grandfather had it the year the south wall went into the sea. He stood at the window every morning at 4, waiting to see if the house was still there. The house is still here. The house is not what you are looking at." She set down her glass. "Edmund, you stand at that window every morning. The servants have noticed. Mrs. Beale has noticed. The groom who brings your horse at 7 has noticed that you are at the glass an hour before, and that you are looking at the shore." He said nothing. "What is on the shore?" He was quiet a long time. Then he said, "A woman." The dowager was quiet even longer. "A woman," she said at last, "on the shore, every morning. Every morning, at first light, she gathers something from the rocks. I do not know what. I do not know who she is. I have never spoken to her." "You have watched her for how long?" 5 months. 5 months. The old woman looked at the fire. 5 months of watching a woman you have never met, from a window she does not know you are standing at. Edmund, you are aware of how that sounds. I am aware. You are aware, and you have gone on. I have gone on. Why? He considered the question. He considered it the way he considered everything, seriously, thoroughly, turning it over in the way his mother had taught him to turn things over before he spoke. "Because she does not know I am there," he said. "Because she is the only person in my life who is not performing for me. Because I watch her work, and it reminds me that there are people in the world who do things for their own reasons and not for mine. Because," he stopped. Because she is the first thing I have looked forward to since Mother died." The old woman's face changed. It softened, all at once, into something young and grieved and fierce. "Then you must go down to the shore," she said. "If I go down, it changes. Everything changes, child. That is the whole of being alive. You cannot stand at a window for the rest of your days watching a woman harvest seaweed. At some point, you must be a person in the world and not a pair of eyes behind glass." "I do not know how. I have forgotten how." "You have not forgotten. You have only stopped practicing. Go down to the shore. Speak to her. Be a man on a beach, and not a duke in a window. If she is worth the watching, she is worth the meeting. And if she is not, you will know it, and you will stop, and the mornings will be your own again." He did not go down the next morning, or the next. He stood at the window and watched her, and thought about what his grandmother had said, and could not make himself move. On the 3rd morning, the weather changed. We'll take a very short break. If you don't want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel. The storm came in from the west at 4 in the morning, a black October storm with the sea behind it. The wind hit the house like a fist. The rain came sideways. The study window shook in its frame, and the candle on the desk blew out, and Edmund stood in the dark and looked at the shore and could see nothing but the white lines of the breakers and the black mass of the sea. She would not come in this. No one would come in this. The shore was a death trap in a westerly gale. The rocks were slick, the tide came in fast, and the waves threw themselves against the sea wall with a force that shook the ground. He stood at the window and waited for the light. The light came, grey and thin, at 7. The storm was still blowing. The shore was empty. She had not come. He felt the absence like a missing step on a stair. He went to his desk. He worked. He worked badly. At 9 the wind eased slightly, and he looked again, and the shore was not empty. She was there. She was on the rocks below the headland, not at the tide line but higher, on the flat shelf where the samphire grew. She was on her knees in the rain, bent over her work, and the waves were hitting the rocks below her, and the spray was reaching her, and she did not move. She was too close to the water. He could see that from the window. The tide was coming in, and the shelf where she knelt would be under water in an hour, and she was either unaware of it or did not care, and neither possibility was acceptable. He left the study. He did not take his coat. He went out through the side door and down the slope in the rain, in his shirt sleeves, the grass slick under his boots, the wind pushing against him like a hand. He reached the sea wall and went over it, and down the rough path to the shore. The sand was heavy with water. The rocks were black and sharp. He made his way across them to the shelf below the headland, and the spray hit him, cold and salt, and he tasted the sea in his mouth, and he came around the last outcrop and found her. She was on her knees on the rock shelf, with her basket beside her and her knife in her hand, and she was cutting samphire from the crevices with quick, sure strokes. The samphire was green and fleshy, and grew in the cracks where the salt water reached, and it was worth, he would learn later, a good deal more than he had supposed. She heard him on the rocks. She looked up. He saw her face for the first time. She was not young. That was the first thing, and he was surprised by the surprise of it, because he had built no picture of her in his mind, or thought he had not, and yet the face that looked up at him was not the face he had imagined. She was perhaps 30, perhaps a year or two more, dark-haired, as he had seen from the window, a strong face, weathered by the sea and the wind, with high bones and a firm mouth, and eyes that were a clear, startling blue, the blue of deep water on a still day, and they were looking at him with the expression of a person who has been interrupted at her work and is deciding whether the interruption is worth the stopping. "You should not be on these rocks," he said. It was not what he had meant to say. It was not anything he had planned, but the waves were hitting the shelf, and the spray was reaching them both, and the tide was visibly climbing, and the words came out the way water comes through a crack, because there was no other way for them to go. "I have been on these rocks every morning for 6 years," she said. "I know when the tide turns. The tide has turned. You have half an hour before this shelf is under." She looked at the water. She looked at it with the quick, practiced eye of a person who reads the sea the way he read a ledger, fluently and without doubt. "3/4 of an hour," she said. "The swell is from the southwest. It takes the far shelf first. This one has time. You are cutting it fine." "I am cutting samphire, sir. It grows in the tidal zone. If I waited for a safe day, I would never cut any." She went back to her work. She went back to it, the way a person goes back to a thing that is more important than the interruption, with a small, decisive motion that shut him out as cleanly as a closed door. He stood on the rocks in the rain and the spray and watched her work, and he felt, standing 3 feet from her in the wind, the same thing he had felt watching her from the window, the particular quality of a person who is entirely absorbed in what they are doing and has no room left over for the world's opinion of it. "My name is Hale," he said. She did not look up. "I did not ask your name, sir." "No, I am offering it. Keep it. I have no use for it. I am working. In a storm. In a storm, the samphire does not wait for fair weather, nor do my customers. You sell it. I sell it. I pickle it and sell it at the market in Combe. It is the best pickled samphire on the coast, and it keeps me and my mother fed and housed, and I will thank you, sir, to let me get on with cutting it before your 3/4 of an hour proves optimistic. He watched her cut. He watched the sure, quick hands and the knife moving in the crevices and the green stems falling into the basket, and he thought that he had spent 5 months watching this woman from a window and had imagined a great many things about her, but had not imagined this, which was a woman who would dismiss a man on a rock shelf in a gale because the samphire would not wait. I live up the hill, he said. I know where you live. She did not look up. You live in the great house. I have seen the light in your window at 5 in the morning for 6 years. You are the Duke's man, a steward or a secretary. You have seen my light. No, I see everything on this shore, sir. It is my shore. I walk it every morning. I know every rock and every pool and every crack where the samphire grows. I know the house on the cliff and the light that comes on at 5 and the shape of the man who stands at the glass. She stopped cutting. She looked up at him. You watch me, she said. The words sat between them on the wet rock. The wind pushed at them both. Yes, he said, I have watched you for 5 months. I know. I have known since the summer. A woman who works the shore learns to feel when she is watched. The gulls tell you. They change their line when there is a person on the cliff. I saw your shape at the window in June. I have not looked up since. You knew I was watching, and you did not look. I did not look because looking would have changed it. I am not here for you, sir. I am here for the samphire. The samphire does not care who watches. I do not care who watches. I care that my basket is full, and my knife is sharp, and the tide gives me time. That is the whole of my morning. You are not in it. She said this without cruelty. She said it the way a person says a thing that is simply true, the way the tide is true and the wind is true, facts that do not require feeling to be valid. I understand, he said. Good. Then you will understand that I must ask you to leave this rock shelf, because the tide is coming in faster than I told you, and I lied about the 3/4 of an hour, because I did not want you to stand over me and worry. It is closer to 20 minutes, and I have half a basket still to cut, and I cannot cut it with a man's shadow on my hands. He left the shelf. He climbed back over the rocks and up the path to the sea wall. The rain was in his face. The wind was at his back. He went up the slope to the house and into his study, and stood at the window, and watched her finish her work, and climb off the shelf, with 2 minutes to spare, the water already licking at the rock where she had knelt. She walked along the shore with her full basket on her arm, and she did not look up at the window, and he understood, standing in the dark study with the rain on the glass, that she was the most extraordinary person he had ever met, and that she wanted nothing from him, nothing at all, not his name, not his attention, not the 5 months of watching, nothing but the 20 minutes of solitude she needed to fill her basket before the tide came in. He sat down at his desk. He opened the ledger. He stared at the figures and did not see them. He went to the market at Combe on Saturday. He went in his plain coat, on foot, which was 4 miles along the coast road, and he told himself he was going because the estate had business in Combe, which was half true, and because the walk would do him good, which was less true, and because he wished to see the samphire, which was the whole truth and the part he would not have said aloud. He found her stall at the end of the market row. It was small, a trestle table and a cloth, and on it stood a row of jars, dark glass, sealed with wax. The labels were handwritten in a clear, plain hand. Samphire, pickled, shore, Shaw. Her name was Shaw. She was behind the table, serving a customer, a woman from the town, who was buying 2 jars with the careful deliberation of a person who knows exactly what she wants and does not intend to be sold anything else. Nell Shaw, for that was her name, Eleanor Shaw, called Nell by the coast and by no one else, wrapped the jars in paper and took the money and thanked the woman and turned to the next customer, which was him. She recognized him. He saw it in her face, the small flicker of recognition, quickly mastered. "The man from the rocks," she said. "The man from the rocks. I have come to buy samphire." "Then you have come to the right place. 3 shillings a jar. It is the best on the coast." "So you have told me." It bears repeating. The woman in the 4th stall sells hers for 2 and 6, and it is not worth the jar it sits in. Mine is cut fresh, blanched the same day, pickled in good vinegar with bay and peppercorn, and sealed to last the winter. It is the best, because I know where to cut it, and when to cut it, and how to keep it, and I have done it since I was 14. You have done it since you were 14. Since my father died. He was a fisherman. He taught me the shore. He died at sea when I was 14, and my mother could not fish, and I could not fish, and the boat was sold, and we needed a living. The samphire was what I knew. The shore was what I knew. So I made a trade of what I knew, and it has kept us 10 years. She said this the way she said everything, plainly, without performance, as a report of the way things were. "I will take 2 jars, he said. She wrapped them. She took his money. She looked at him across the trestle table, with those blue eyes, clear and direct. "You are not a steward," she said. "I beg your pardon? I said you were the Duke's man. A steward or a secretary. You are not. Your hands are too clean, and your coat is too good, and you walked 4 miles to buy samphire you could have sent a servant for. You are either mad or you are not what you seem. Perhaps both. Perhaps. But a man who watches a woman from a window for 5 months and then walks 4 miles to buy her samphire is a man with a purpose, and I should like to know what it is before you come to my stall again. My purpose is samphire. Your purpose is not samphire. Your purpose is standing in front of me in a plain coat, telling me your name is Hale, when the only Hale in this county is a blacksmith in Thorbury, who is 4 feet tall and 60 years old. Your name is not Hale. I do not know what it is, and I do not greatly care, but I will not be lied to at my own market stall by a man I have already caught watching me from a window. The truth or nothing, sir. I deal in plain goods." He looked at her. She looked back. The market moved around them, the noise and the smell and the press of Saturday, and the 2 of them stood in the middle of it, like stones in a stream. "My name is Edmund Ashworth," he said. "I am the Duke of Rathmore." She went still, not the stillness of shock, the stillness of a woman recalculating a sum she had thought was settled. "The Duke," she said. "Yes. You own the house on the cliff. Yes. You own the shore I walk every morning. Technically, yes. There is no technically about it. The shore below the high water mark is Crown land. Above it is yours. The samphire shelf is above. I have been cutting samphire on your land for 10 years without permission. That is trespass. I am not here about trespass." "Then what are you here about?" "I am here because you are the only person in my life who has not performed for me. I am here because I have watched you work the shore for 5 months, and you are the most honest thing I have seen from my window since my mother died. I am here because you told me to leave a rock shelf in a gale and did not care that I was watching, and the not caring was the most extraordinary thing anyone has done in my presence in 5 years. I care a great deal about many things, Your Grace. I do not care who watches me cut samphire. The samphire does not require an audience, and neither do I. I know, that is the whole of it. You do not require an audience. Every person I have met in 5 years has required an audience. You are the first who has not. And I find that I cannot stop watching, and I find that I do not wish to, and I find that 4 miles is not too far to walk to buy a jar of pickles from a woman who told me to get off her rock shelf. It is not my rock shelf, it is yours. You have just said so. Then I give you permission to cut samphire on it, for the rest of your life, without limit. That is the Duke's word, given at a market stall, and it is as binding as any deed my solicitor could draw. She looked at him for a long moment. The blue eyes were not softened, they were not warmed. They were considering him the way she considered the tide, as a force to be measured and understood. I do not need your permission, she said. I have been cutting that shelf for 10 years without it, but I will take it, because a woman who refuses a duke's word is a fool, and I am not a fool. No, you are very far from a fool, and you are very far from your study, Your Grace. Go home, eat your samphire. If it is as good as I say it is, and it will be, you may come again next Saturday. I am here every week. I do not go anywhere. I am not a complicated woman. He went home. He ate the samphire. It was, as she had said, the best on the coast. He came back the next Saturday, and the Saturday after that. The watching did not stop. He still stood at the window every morning and watched her on the shore. But it was different now. It was different because she knew, and because knowing had not changed her. She still came at first light. She still worked the tide line. She still did not look up. She did not look up because she had told him the truth on the rock shelf. She was not there for him. She was there for the samphire. The samphire was her living. The living was her mother's life and her own, and the living did not stop because a duke had walked 4 miles to buy a jar of pickles and told her his name. But on Saturday mornings, at the market, with the trestle between them and the jars lined up and the crowd pressing and the day moving, they talked. They talked the way 2 people talk who have nothing to gain from each other and therefore nothing to hide. She told him about the shore and the tides and the samphire and the particular art of knowing when a plant is ready to cut and when it needs another week. She told him about her father, who had fished the coast for 20 years and drowned in a squall he should have seen coming and did not. She told him about her mother, who was 60 and arthritic and could no longer walk the shore, and who sat in the cottage at the edge of the headland and pickled what Nell brought home, and who was, Nell said, the finest pickler on the coast, and would have been the finest in England if England had a prize for pickling, which it did not and should. He told her about the estate. He told her about the sea wall that was crumbling, and the farms that were rebuilding, and the debt that was nearly cleared. He told her about his mother, who had made him eat and made him walk and made him listen to her voice so that he would not go mad, and who had died and left him in a silent study with a lit window at 5 in the morning and no one to tell him to stop. You do not stop, she said one Saturday. That is the whole of your difficulty. You do not stop working, and you do not stop watching, and you do not stop standing at that window. You do everything from a distance. You watch the shore from the cliff. You watch me from the glass. You watch your own life from inside a study. You are the most distant man I have ever met, and you are standing 3 feet from me. I do not know how to be closer. You do. You came down to the rock shelf. That was close. That was the nearest you have been to anyone in 2 years, and you did it because the tide was coming in and you were afraid I would drown, which means you are capable of closing the distance when something matters enough. You mattered enough. The samphire mattered enough. You did not know me. You knew a shape on a shore. You came down because a shape you had been watching was in danger, and the watching had become a need, and needs make people move. She handed a jar to a customer and took the coins and turned back to him. The question is whether you can come down from the cliff when the tide is not coming in, when there is no emergency, when it is only an ordinary morning, and a woman is cutting samphire, and the distance between you is the same distance it has always been, and closing it means being a person instead of a pair of eyes. He looked at her across the trestle table. She looked back. The blue eyes were steady and clear, and without a trace of deference. "Come down tomorrow," she said, "to the shore, at first light, not to watch, to walk. Walk with me while I work. Carry the basket if you like. Be on the shore instead of above it, and see whether the view is better from the ground." He came down the next morning. He came down the slope in the grey light before dawn, in his boots and his plain coat, and he found her at the tide line, bending to the rocks, the basket at her hip. She looked up when she heard him. She did not smile. She was not a woman who smiled as a greeting. She was a woman who looked at you and let the looking be the greeting, and if the looking said you were welcome, it was enough. "Carry this," she said, and handed him the basket. He carried it. He carried it along the shore while she worked, and she told him the names of the things as they went, the samphire and the sea beet and the dulse and the laver, the whole edible garden of the tide line that she had been harvesting for 10 years while he stood at a window above her and did not know what he was seeing. He carried the basket, and the carrying was the simplest thing he had done in 5 years, and the simplest thing was, it turned out, the thing he had needed most. They walked the shore together after that. Not every morning. She would not have it every morning. She needed mornings alone, she said, the way a person needs a room of their own, and he understood that because he had a room of his own, and it had nearly killed him. But most mornings, 3 mornings a week, then 4. He came down the slope in the early light, and she was there, and they walked the tide line together, and he carried the basket, and she told him things about his own shore that he had never known. She told him where the seals came in November and where the otters played at dawn. She told him where the freshwater spring came through the cliff and made a pool the rock pipits drank from. She told him where his sea wall was weakest, which she knew because she had watched it shift for 10 years, the way he had watched his ledgers, with the close, habitual attention of a person whose life depends on getting it right. "The 5th pier is going," she said one morning, pointing to the wall above the beach. "The mortar is cracked. I saw it in the summer. One more winter gale, and it will open, and the water will come through, and you will lose 10 feet of wall and half the path above it." "You are sure?" "I am sure the way. I am sure the tide will come in at 12:14 this afternoon. I have watched this shore every day for 10 years. I know its face better than I know my own. The pier is going. Mend it now, or lose it in February." He mended it. He sent the mason the next day. The mason confirmed what Nell had said, and the pier was repaired before the winter gales, and the wall held, and the path held, and the Duke of Ravensmere stood on the mended wall in a February storm, and watched the waves hit and fall back, and thought about a woman who had seen the crack from the shore and named it, the way she named everything, plainly and without expectation of thanks. His grandmother came to dinner. She looked at him across the table and saw what she had been looking for since October. "You went down," she said. "I went down." "And?" "Her name is Nell Shaw. She harvests samphire. She has been walking my shore for 10 years. She knows more about my seawall than my mason. She told me the 5th pier was going, and she was right. And if she had not told me, I would have lost it in the storm. And she is the woman from the window." She is the woman from the window. She is also the most direct, most unimpressed, most entirely herself person I have ever met. She told me to get off her rock shelf. She told me my name was not Hale. She told me I live my life from a distance, and that the distance is the problem. She was right about all of it. She was right about all of it. She is right about everything. She reads the tide the way I read a ledger, and I have begun to think the tide is the more important document. His grandmother set down her glass. "Ask her. I cannot ask a samphire seller to marry a duke. You can ask anyone you choose. You are a duke. That is the one advantage of the position, and you have had precious few advantages from it. The county will say that the Duke of Rathmore has married a woman who knows more about his coastline than his entire estate office. The county will talk for a season, then the county will taste her samphire and change the subject. Ask her, Edmund. Your mother told you to stop hiding. This is what stopping looks like." He asked her on the shore. Where else would he ask her? It was a November morning, a year to the day since he had come down the slope for the first time. The dawn was grey and still. The sea lay flat and silver. The tide was out, and the shore was wide, and Nell was at the tide line with her basket and her knife, and he was beside her, carrying the basket, as he had carried it for 6 months. "Nell," he said. "Edmund." She had started using his name in August. She had started without asking permission, because she was not a woman who asked permission for things, and the name had come out of her the way the tide comes in, naturally, because it was time. "I should like to ask you something." "You should like to ask me something you have been carrying for 3 weeks. I have watched you carry it. You carry it the way you carry the basket, with both hands and a slight lean to the left. Ask it. Will you marry me?" She set down the knife. She straightened. She looked at him. "That is a large question for a Tuesday morning." "It is. I have no smaller one." "Why?" "Because you are the only person in my life who does not perform for me. Because you told me the 5th pier was going and saved my sea wall. Because you told me I live at a distance and taught me to come down. Because I carried your basket for 6 months, and it was the best thing I did in 5 years. Because my mother told me to stop hiding, and you are the first person who has made the stopping feel like arriving instead of falling." She looked at the sea. She looked at the shore. She looked at the rocks where the samphire grew, and the cliff where the house stood, and the window where a man had watched her every morning for a year. "One condition," she said. "Name it. I keep the shore. I walk it every morning. I cut the samphire. I sell it at market. I am not a duchess who sits in a drawing room. I am a woman who works the tide line, and the tide line is where I am myself, and I will not give it up for a title, or a window, or a warm study. I would not ask you to. And you come down, every morning. Not to watch, to walk. The view is better from the ground, Edmund. I told you that the first day. It has not changed. "The view is better from the ground," he said. "I know. You were right. You are always right. I am not always right. I am always honest. There is a difference, and it is the whole difference." Then yes, for the man on the shore, not for the Duke at the window. The man on the shore is the one I know. The Duke at the window is the one who watched. I will take the one who came down. They were married in the spring, in the small church on the headland, with the sea loud below them and the gulls wheeling above. Nell wore a dress the color of the sea on a still day, because she was a practical woman, and she wore what she was. The samphire stall stayed open. It stayed open every Saturday at Comm Market, Duchess or not, because the samphire would not wait for fair weather, and neither would Nell Shore. And every morning, at first light, they walked the shore together. The Duke of Rathmore and the woman who had never once looked his way. She had not looked, because looking would have changed it. She had not looked, because the samphire was more important. She had not looked, because a woman who works the tide does not stop to see who is watching from the cliff. She had not needed to look. He had come down. That was the whole of it. He had come down from the window and onto the shore, and into the life she was already living, and the life had made room for him, the way the shore makes room for the tide, without effort and without fuss, and without once rearranging itself for his benefit. The window in the study still lit at 5, but the man behind it was not watching any more. He was putting on his boots. He was going down the slope. He was walking the tide line with a basket on his arm and a woman beside him who had taught him, without meaning to, the oldest lesson in the world. The distance between watching and living is the length of a hill, and the hill is only steep until you walk it. Thank you for listening to the story, all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from, and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss new stories.